I know it's been a while since we've been together on Wednesday nights, so just as a reminder, please make sure you turn on your microphones as they do record this for, you're welcome. Elsha does record this for putting out on YouTube for those who aren't able to be here. So if you're reading or asking a question or making a comment, please make sure that the light is on the microphone so that can be heard. We are in the middle of part 9. We are ready for question 17. But I want to kind of go back and make sure that we kind of have the context, because it has been a couple of weeks, and I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to forget things pretty easily if I don't review. So what is happening in 1 Peter chapter 3? What have we looked at so far? We haven't yet dealt with the husbands. We've looked at the We've looked at the wives, and chapter 3 verse 1 starts off, in the same way, you wives. Now, I make a point of therefores, but because a therefore connects with what came before. But in the same way does as well. So what was he talking about then in chapter 2? In the same way as what?
I had verse 13, 2:13.
Okay.
Is that the one it connects with?
13 and 18 both are providing people with directive to submit. And we've talked about what submission is. It's not roll over, play dead, you're worthless and valueless and have no purpose. It is completely not that. It is align yourself underneath the authority of another, placing them as more important than yourself so that you can accomplish the mission. And it comes from this military idea and concept of being in formation, lining up in such a way that together you accomplish what you're supposed to do. And so servants were instructed to be submissive to their masters in verse 18. And verse 13, everyone was instructed to submit to the human institutions, whether to a king or to a governor. But why? What is the reason that was given there in verse 13? It says, for the Lord's sake, right? Well, if you go back to verse 12, it kind of expands that and really gives us a picture that this idea of submission is not just to align for structural purposes so that society functions well, so that, because some people look at this and they try and boil it down to just that this was just instructions so that, there's not rebellions in government and there's not uprisings of slaves, and so that women will just behave well and stay barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. That's the accusation that is sometimes made. The reality, though, is that God is calling these people, these various groups, up to something much more significant, something much more important than that. And what Peter's doing is flipping the script on society. Whereas the society that Peter was talking to had certain institutions and structure and expectations, Peter's saying we're not acting this way just for society's sake, just because of Roman or Greek philosophy and sociology and that kind of a thing. Instead, if you go back to verse 12 of chapter 2, it says, keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, on account of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. The goal is to live in such a way that people see Christ in us. And I got to brag on my kids just a little bit. Over the Christmas break, one of the assignments that they had was to memorize Philippians 2, verses 1 through 11. And the big idea in that is, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. And are you trying to quote it for us? Just, I know you can. Yes, I quote the King James because that's what I'm used to. Anyway, to have the same mindset as what Christ had, that he, although he's in the form of God, he is God, does not count that as something to be grasped and held on to. Instead, he emptied himself. And it says that he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. Here's God himself, the highest there can be, lowers himself to become a servant. And being formed like a human, found in human form, he humbled himself even to the point of death. Not just death, but death on a cross. So the highest of high takes on the lowest of low. Why? Because of his great love for us, so that we could be saved. If Jesus did that much for us, can we not lay aside our pride, our arrogance, our self-centeredness, our me, in order to display to the world around the greatness of God? That's what the context of this is. And I don't want us to lose sight of that. Yes, it's been a little bit since we looked at these, but that's the big story. That's the big idea that Peter's dealing with here. And so he starts off by dealing with how people should interact with human governments, with human institutions. But then he flips the script, like I said. Normally, in their society, you talk to the landowners, to the slaveholders, to the men who are of great importance in their society, and they give the orders. It's a hierarchical system. And yet Peter, he starts with the lowly servants and instructs them about how they should behave. And then, right in the middle of that, he gives the explanation in 2:21 through 25 that our example is Christ. That this is something that is of great importance. Even angels are curious about this and looking at it. And that Christ gives us the perfect example. And then he continues on by addressing wives. And again, in that society, wives would not have been the first ones to talk to. They also would not necessarily have been instructed by an outsider. They got their direction from their husbands. Peter is not throwing away society, though. He, to some extent, really reinforces some of these ideas, but not because that's what society says to do. Instead, because this is what Christ has said to do. And so when dealing with wives, which we're going to be picking up kind of halfway through that, so I'm going to go back to chapter 3, verse 1 and read it. He says, in the same way, so that's a continuation of what we've been looking at, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands. Now, notice that that is a limited directive of submission. This is not women are less than men. That's wives, align yourself with your husband, and only your husband. Align yourself with your own husband. But then it gives the explanation, the why. So that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, and we talked about how disobedient is like they refuse to be reasoned with. Even if they're one of those who says, I don't want to talk about that Jesus stuff. Just leave me alone. Don't talk Bible to me. He says, even if that's how they are, that they might be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. Wives, do you recognize that this submission, that this alignment with your husband is so that they would get saved? Like you are showing Christ to them. What higher calling is there than to be that display of Jesus Christ to somebody else? This is not Peter putting wives down, but instead giving them and reminding them of the task as a follower of Christ that they have. The way that would happen, verse 2, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior, And, so in addition to that, let not your adornment be merely external. And we talked about how adornment comes from the word cosmos, the world. So like, is your whole world focused only on how you appear to others, the outward appearance? Well, we looked at the Old Testament. God doesn't look at the outward, he looks at the heart. That's why he picked David to be king and not one of David's brothers. And so don't let your entire world be simply the external, such as braiding of hair, wearing of gold, putting on of dresses. Instead, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. And that's where we ended last time, this idea that God views this as of great price or great value. So women, wives, if you want something that is of lasting significance, do something that God values. Not the fleeting fashions of the world, not the merely external appearances that fade away. Instead, let it be something worthwhile, specifically that gentle and quiet spirit. And when we dealt with those, we recognized that this word for gentle, it means meek. It is the third beatitude, which is interesting to me because we're about to get into the Sermon on the Mount on Sundays. And Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, blessed are the gentle. Blessed are the meek. But then I also pointed out how this same word is used by Christ of himself. What are Christians supposed to be? Like Christ, right? I mean, that's the word, that's the definition. And so what Peter's doing is saying, be like Jesus. And this is how wives can display Christ, specifically to their husbands who are disobedient, but also to the world around them, to the Gentiles, like we saw back in chapter 2, verse 12. The second one was a quiet, so that they would have a gentle and quiet spirit. And we looked at that idea of quiet. This word is not silent. It's tranquil, peaceful. Like a lake. You've ever seen a lake that's all stirred up and the water's roiling, and if you're out on a boat, it gets kind of crazy. That's not tranquil. That's not quiet or peaceful. Instead, the expectation of the wife is that she's not causing chaos within the home, but I'm trusting God. My peace is from God. It does have a connotation of reverence, and so this wife has the peace of God that passes all understanding. She is steady. And when we were looking through this, we talked a little bit about Proverbs 31 and how that also plays out. Definitely worth studying and looking into. So that is viewed as very precious in the sight of God. Now, verse 5, Peter's going to shift focus, and he's going to use another example. And so question number 17 on your handout is, who is used as an example of this in verses 5 and 6?
Holy women of former
Sarah.
times and Sarah.
Okay?
Yeah, holy women and Sarah.
The holy women of the former times, so women of the Old Testament, and then he specifies Sarah. But notice with that holy women, where did I lose it? Yeah, for in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Notice that women is plural. And so he's not just going to point out Sarah. He's saying, look at the Old Testament. Look at the holy people of the past. Learn from their example. See what they did and how they lived, and copy that. Do the same thing. And what was it that they did?
Submissive to their own husbands.
Okay, they were submissive to their own husbands, but before that,
Adorned themselves.
They used to.
even before that, in the verse,
Hope
who
in God.
hoped in God. So their focus is that hope in God. that word, this is question number 18, what did they do toward God in verse 5? Hope in God. That word refers to that they were waiting in full confidence. So they were patient. They were trusting that God would accomplish what he said. And so that's the idea that Peter's then tying these wives in the early Christian faith are to look back to these holy women of the past who had their hope in God. They didn't necessarily have the completion of God's promises, but they trusted him. They said, I know that he is faithful. I know that he will accomplish what he has promised. You know, that's a reminder to us all, not just to the wives, but to all of us, that we need to be steady in full confidence of what God is going to do, that he will fulfill his promises. But because of that, according to verse 5, they would adorn themselves, and that ties back to verse 3, let your adornment not merely be the external, such as braiding of hair, wearing of gold, jewelry, putting on dresses, but instead, the hidden person of the heart. Well, that's the same idea that's being presented here. And that word adorn is an imperfect verb. So it's continuously, not just they put it on and that was it. But like constantly, that was how they were preparing themselves, dressing themselves, as the picture goes. Every morning, most of us get up and put on fresh clothes, right? Well, this is the idea that continuously, that's what they're doing. They're adorning themselves in this way, with this attitude, the imperishable qualities of a gentle and quiet spirit, this idea of the hidden person of the heart. That's what they're doing, specifically by being submissive to their own husbands. So Peter's wrapping it all together and saying, you need to do what the past generation did of the holy women. Not just any and all women, but the holy ones, the ones who trusted God, the ones who were set apart as sacred, as saints, as it were. Specifically then, he gives the example of Sarah. So question 19, what did Sarah do according to verse 6?
Obeyed.
She obeyed. What does that word mean? Like, define that word. Explain it.
I had heed.
Okay. Heed. It comes from the word to listen. So she heard and put into practice. She listened and did. This is a word that is used in Ephesians 6:1, where it says, children, obey your parents. Now, a lot of parents like to use that one, teach the kids. It's a good thing, because in that instance, it's commanded that the children are to obey their parents. I do want to point out here, it's not commanded that wives have to obey their husbands. But Sarah did. And so it's interesting to me that this is not something that they are instructed, you must be obedient. Instead, it's you must be submissive. And an example of that is Sarah obeyed. This idea of submissive is align yourself with your husband to accomplish the goal that is really bigger than either of you. The goal is displaying God, displaying Christ to the world around. But specifically, Sarah did obey. And so the implication is that wives should be obedient, but it's not the same command that is given to children. That's the point that I'm wanting to make.
So are you saying that they are both commands? You must submit is a command.
Submit is a command, yes. The idea of be submissive was a command.
Right.
Here, the example is that Sarah obeyed because she is submitting.
Okay.
And so submission and obedience are not necessarily the same thing. They are similar. They have some overlap, but it's not necessarily the same thing. Yes, ma'am.
I would say that she obeyed as well as respected him, because it says that she called him Lord.
Yes.
So it was both obedience and respect.
Yes. Go ahead.
I was shocked because I expect expected being submissive to be a command, but just says it's a participle
The,
in
in verse
5
1, verse 3.
in
With aorist,
Three-
active indicative.
and 5, it's a participle.
in 3:5,
3 verse 1
being
and
submissive,
5.
yeah. Well, because of in the same way, that goes back to verse 13. I believe 2:13 is the imperative. And so
Okay,
in the
thank
same
you,
way,
Ryan.
links those previous ones.
Yep.
Yeah,
Check me and make sure I'm not remembering incorrectly.
I'll do that.
I'll beat you.
I never trust what the pastor said. That's because
Good.
you have my mouse.
Good call.
Hey, you said you, here it is,
Yep, there it
command,
is, imperative.
Okay,
yes.
okay. Just
Aorist
good for
command.
checking and making sure. Yeah, because all of these are tied together, the in the same way gives it the force of that initial
Yeah,
previously.
I haven't caught that before.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you caught it now.
I'll be heads up on that now.
So, Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and that is the idea of respect, as you mentioned. You will be hard pressed to find a specific verse in which Sarah says to Abraham, "You are my Lord." But that attitude and that idea is present as she interacts and does certain things. Specifically, I think that there is a connection with when Abraham and Sarah go down into Egypt. And Abraham is leading the way, and it's not necessarily the best of choices. And Abraham does some things that aren't real wise. And how does Sarah react? How does she deal with that? Well, she obeys. She submits. She goes with him. She does what he says and trusts that God is going to protect her in it. Now, we're going to get to the husbands in a minute. So let's not take this to say, oh, well, husbands can do stupid things and the wife just has to deal with it. No, husbands are given instructions. But when they fail to do what they're supposed to, how does the wife deal with this? How is she supposed to respond? And that's what this section is dealing with, because it even specified, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they don't trust God, they're not following, they're not doing the right thing, she is able to win them to the Lord by the way that she acts. And then it uses Sarah as an example. Like I said, I think that this is dealing with when Abram did some not so smart things, and still God blesses Sarah for her attitude and for her response. And so as a result, God uses Sarah as the example, saying, "And you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear." That idea of become her children, Abraham is looked to as the father of God's people, right? The father of Israel specifically, but then in Romans, Paul is going to twist that or flip that and say that the true seed of Abraham, the true offspring, are those who trust God. It's not about the fleshly descent, it's about the spiritual descent. Those who follow him, trust him, and are truly God's people. And so in the same way, Peter's not saying that you thus become fleshly descendants of Sarah, but that you are in that line, that spiritual line of godly people, if you do the same thing, if you act in this way, if you do what is right. And then it says, without being frightened by any fear. Now that's a kind of an odd or an interesting phrasing. Question 21, I asked you, what are they not frightened by? And it's any fear. This isn't the same kind of fear that we often talk about. I use the example of, with fear, of reverence, of awe. I like the example of fire. You know, we treat fire respectfully. This is a different word. This is not that same thing. This one is alarm. This one is like terror and fright and being alarmed, which I think connects back to that imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit. You don't have to have this fright and this alarm and this chaos when you're trusting God, when you're living the way that He wants you to, when you are displaying a Christ-likeness. How did Christ deal with the arrival of guards to arrest him, haul him off, beat him, spit on him, crown him with thorns, and nail him to a tree? He was not alarmed by this. He was not in terror by this. Why? Because he knew what God's plans were. And in the same way, when Sarah goes with Abraham down to Egypt, or I don't remember the other one, Abimelech, I think, and is brought into the household of Pharaoh, she doesn't respond with terror or fear. She submits to Abraham, and when Abraham said, "Call me your brother," or say that you're my sister, she obeys. That wasn't a lie. It wasn't a wise thing to do either, but it wasn't a lie. So that's what she did. And as a result, God protected. God intervened and handled it. Now, I'm making sure that I didn't miss anything major or significant in my notes. Any thoughts or questions, anything else in that section towards wives before we moved on to husbands? Okay. Husbands. Well, question 22. Who does verse 7 address? Husbands. All right. How is this verse linked to what came before, or connected to what came before?
The word likewise.
Likewise.
Likewise, or in the same way. So this is not disconnected. This is not a completely separate concept or idea. It is in the same way. It's connecting with everything that's come before. And so in the context, he is going to give instructions to husbands just like he gave instructions to wives, to servants, and to citizens about how they need to live so that the world around sees Jesus. And I think that it is important to recognize that there's only one verse given to husbands, but if these husbands have paid attention at all, they're going to get the idea, just like he was talking to all these other people, that's what's going on. That's where I need to focus and what I need to do. And so, what is the instruction given to husbands?
With your wives in an understanding way.
Okay, dwell with them, live with them. And then specifically in what way? In an understanding or knowledgeable way. This word comes from gnosko. We've talked about gnosko as experiential knowledge. When I read this verse, I'm reminded of something that one of my professors used to say. It was his advice to husbands. Husbands, get a PhD, a doctorate in your wife. Study her, learn of her, figure it out. Because if you just go into marriage thinking, oh, I don't need to keep working, I was a good boyfriend as I learned what she liked, and now we're married, so I don't have to worry about it. You're missing the boat. You're completely missing the idea. Instead, you still need to learn and grow together and understand her, value her as significant and important, and we're going to get to that here in a minute. But the instruction is to live with her in an understanding or in a knowing way. We're going to see specifically two things that they are to know about her. Specifically, that she is weaker and that she is a co-heir. We're going to dig into those. Neither of those are derogatory. This idea that women are weaker is sometimes looked at as, oh, well, you're just putting them down. We're going to get to that here in a moment. But neither of these are with the idea of derogatory, but instead valuing and recognizing that her place and who she is, and knowing her, studying her even, so that you can dwell with. And I like to use that word dwell because it gives the idea of a long-term commitment to living, not just, well, I'm in and out and I do my thing or whatever, but to live with, to dwell in the presence of, to be amongst her, so that your attitude is not, well, I go home at the end of a long day because I have to, fall into bed, get up and run away as quick as I can. That shouldn't be your attitude, but instead to have this longing, even as we look back at Genesis, where it says a leaving of the father and mother and a cleaving, a welding together or weaving together of life. And so the idea is to dwell with her. I do find it interesting, it's either italicized or parenthesis or bracketed, this idea of your wives, because the word itself is just dwell with. And so there's some discussion on how to take and to understand this passage. And I think that there's a level of validity to the idea that this is, in the society that Peter is talking to, dealing with anyone who is under your authority. And that it is largely related to husbands and wives, but that this isn't just a textbook on how husbands and wives should interact. If you look at this as only dealing with marriage, I think that you're missing some of what's going on. Because Peter here has dealt with the various players in society. The citizens, the slaves, the wives, those are historically the ones who were largely downplayed, and now he shifts focus to the one in charge, to the one who would be the master, the husband, potentially even the king or governor. So now he's kind of addressing everybody else, as it were. You who are in authority, dwell with those under your authority, because oftentimes the homeowner would have authority over the servants and the slaves. Now, it's recognized that that's an expansion of the normal thought process and the normal idea. He is going to specify into the woman. But part of the reason that this does make sense is that word for, since she is a woman, is not the same as is normally used for a wife. It's a different word. And so it's largely a feminine. Because of her femininity, you're going to treat her this way. So if that's what he's saying, the idea is you husbands, you who are typically elite in society, need to change your mindset. You need to think about this a little bit differently. Specifically, that's going to apply to your wives. Additionally, that would apply to anyone under your authority. So the application of this can be broader than just your wives, but anyone in your household would be part of what this connects with. I think that is a valid understanding, because that word, your wives, isn't in the Greek. It's put in for our understanding. Then you deal with this idea that since she is a woman, it would be those female slaves, those people who are in your household. But it is largely related to this idea of who is your first and closest relationship in this way. Well, having dealt with wives previously, we do recognize that the husbands, likewise, or in the same way, need to live or dwell with them in this way of knowledge, particularly because they are someone who is weaker. Now, this word, do what? Go ahead.
I'm struggling with that.
Okay.
It says, as with a weaker vessel.
Okay.
So that's like saying like, as if they were a weaker vessel. It's not necessarily, I don't see it necessarily saying they are a weaker vessel.
Okay.
Am I missing something?
I get what you're saying. They are described as feminine, which is viewed as weaker. We're going to get into that word weaker recognizing that throughout the New Testament, it's actually viewed as a positive thing, but not the same as stronger. So societally, they would be viewed as men are strong and women are weak. Men are masculine, women are feminine. The difference being the norm. And so what they're doing here is that they are to dwell with them in a way that knows or understands, recognizes the difference that there is. Specifically, as with someone who's weaker, I got a question. That's why I bring this thing out here, so I can check something, make sure that I'm right. Because if I'm not, I don't want to say it. No, it is not using a word to say like, as if they were weaker, because it will also say, as with co-heirs. And so it's the same word in both of those. So there is that understanding that they could be, or theoretically they could be stronger. That doesn't impact the understanding of how to play this out.
Okay,
I get what you're saying, yeah, I'm thinking in real time here.
So
I'm thinking slowly, I'm sorry.
We're discussing the idea of are weaker or as weaker.
As weaker, yes,
But more at, like you would treat someone who's weaker physically.
yes,
Not mentally, not emotionally, not whatever.
Well,
But
it
just
means-
the way you would treat someone who is weaker.
well, so the idea is to dwell with them in an understanding way as if they were weaker. Whether that is true or not is not he's not assuming them to be true or not, but that's the attitude as if they were. And I think that's what Jim's trying to point out, is that they don't have to be weaker, but as if they were weaker, because they are feminine, or they are a woman. So,
And
Did you
then
have-
he's using the idea of a vessel, because if you have a vessel or a basket or fabric that's weak, you're going to be cautious.
yes,
And so it's just a way of respecting the situation. So,
yeah,
I see it as more of that she's to be cared for. You
yeah,
know, really not as to whether it's strength or that, because she is feminine and she is the woman, she is to be cared for. She could be a very strong woman, you know, but
This,
He's
yeah,
still
it's
supposed to-
not intended to imply that women are incapable,
No, I
but
don't mean
instead
to
that
do that.
they are to be treated with respect.
Mm-hmm.
I like the example, if you've been out to our house, you've seen our mug collection. I like the example of, we have some china cups, and they're fine china. I mean, like, they're grandmother's china type of thing. How do you treat those?
you take care of
I've got, on the wall, I also have a really big, heavy-duty mug, my coffee mug. How do you treat that? Well, they're different. It's not that one is better than the other or more valuable or significant. They both have good memories. They both have stories behind them. They're both important to us, but they're different. One is stronger, one is weaker. Now, I'm not going to bash either one against the countertop if I can avoid it, because they'll both break, but they are different. And so what he's saying is that the husbands need to dwell in an understanding way, as if knowing, recognizing this difference, this weakness. Now, I saw another hand over here. No? Okay. I've got a list of places where this word or a similar word is used, and I started looking at a bunch, and then I kind of narrowed it down just to 1 Corinthians, to Paul's use of this. And let's take a look at 1 Corinthians. We're going to start off in chapter 1. And the point of where we're going through these various verses in 1 Corinthians is oftentimes in their society, this idea of weakness was viewed derogatorily, that it was a negative, that men are strong, women are nothing. What we're going to see is that Paul flips that script in 1 Corinthians, and this weakness is actually a good thing. This weakness is viewed positively and different in Christ. And so I think that Peter's drawing that same idea, which we're going to get to, but show her honor here in a little bit. So the first one is 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 25. The foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. It's that same idea of being weak. But then continue on. Now, obviously we say, well, yeah, the least of God is obviously way stronger than mankind. But, verse 27, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. And so, like I said, Paul is kind of flipping this around and saying that these things that people view as weak, whether they are or not is not really the focus. That's the way that they're viewed. God is going to use that to confound the wise, or to make the ones who think that they're strong recognize that they're not compared to God. If you jump forward to chapter 4, 1 Corinthians 4, verse 10, it says, "We are fools for Christ's sake, but you are prudent in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are distinguished, but we are without honor. To this present hour, we are both hungry and thirsty and poorly clothed and are roughly treated and are homeless." And this is where Paul is expressing what it is to be a servant of Christ. And he's putting himself into that weak category, that comparative setting. Go on to chapter 9. In verse 22, in 1 Corinthians 9:22, Paul kind of draws that same idea and continues it. He says, "To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some." And last one in chapter 12, in verse 22. I'm going to back up a little bit on that one. I'm going to go back to verse 20. "But now there are many members, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, 'I have no need of you,' or again, the head to the feet, 'I have no need of you.' On the contrary, it is much truer that the members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary, and those members of the body which we deem less honorable, on these we bestow more abundant honor, and our unseemly members come to have more abundant seemliness." So this idea that weak is not to be looked down on, but instead recognized as different. And yet, here throughout 1 Corinthians, we've seen that that's actually elevated to be a better thing, to be a good thing, to be positive. And so I don't think that Peter is trying to derogatorily reference women as being weaker, but instead to recognize that there is this difference, and so that you are to dwell with them with knowledge as with someone who is weaker, as that there is this difference, because, or since, she is a woman, since she is, and I already mentioned that word means feminine, not that it's not that she is physically, biologically a woman that's at view here. but that she is different, that women and men are created differently, and that's a good thing. God designed it that way, and you need to act in such a way that you understand that and treat them correctly. So, question number 26. What is to be shown to her? It says, and show her
Honor.
honor. Well, what is honor?
Treating him as valuable.
Okay. It's that idea of value, of price.
Price, respect.
Yeah. It connects with respect. It connects with this idea that they are important, significant. Whereas society would say that as the husband, you are lord of your castle. You are master of all that you survey. And everybody else is lower and lesser. Now, Peter's saying, no, show her honor, dignity, value, recognize her importance. Trying to decide which ones to use. Going back to what we just talked about in 1 Corinthians 12, we see that there were parts of the body of Christ, that were weaker, that are now more esteemed, that were thought lesser, that are actually of greater value. And then I mentioned Proverbs 31, and I just want to point out Proverbs 31, verse 10. If I can get my pages to turn to it. Proverbs 31:10, an excellent wife, who can find her? Her worth is far above jewels. Rubies is what some translations have. So if the husband dwells with knowledge, they recognize there may be some physical differences, but that does not mean degrade or push down, but instead lift up, honor, value, recognize that this person is different than you, and that's a good thing. And together, you are fellow heirs of the grace of life. And so I think this is somewhat connected with what Jim was pointing out. It says, as with someone weaker, it also says, as a fellow heir. This is recognizing that as a potentiality, as a possibility. What if, and here's where we've been dealing with a lot of the people who are on the lower end. And if they were in a situation where the other person was not who they should be, how were they supposed to respond? Well, the servants were to be submissive to their masters with all respect, not only those who are good and gentle, but also those who are unreasonable. So Peter dealt with what if they weren't who they should be. In chapter 1, we've already talked about the husband that could be, chapter 3, verse 1. We already talked about the husband that could be disobedient to the word, not who he should be. And Peter addressed, how do you deal with that, and why? To what end and what purpose? Well, the husband in this section, in this verse, isn't really under the authority of, or really having to deal with. What if your wife is not? Well, in that society, who cares? I can get rid of her and get another one. Or I can just quash her down and force her to do whatever I tell her to. Or even I can just use true force if I so choose. You could get away with that. Except that's not how Peter expects. That's not what Peter is desirous of or telling them to do. Instead, you're to dwell with them in an understanding way, as if they're weaker, as if they're a fellow heir. Well, what if they're not? Well, given the context that we've been dealing with, the way that we treat others is with the goal of seeing them come to Christ. So if they're not, I'm going to treat them well, even if they don't deserve it in my mind, because I get to display Christ to them. I get to be that one who shows what Christ did. Do we deserve the blessings that Jesus gives us? No, not at all. And yet he loved us so much that he gave himself. The examples given by Paul are similar as well. And he talks about how that a husband is to love his wife to the point of giving up his own life for her. Here, Peter's doing something a little bit different, but similar also. He is to show her honor or raise her up in value or in price as if she's a fellow heir of the grace of life. Now, we've come across this idea of a fellow heir or a joint heir. Where else have we seen that?
In Ephesians, or.
Yep,
Yeah,
Ephesians chapter
Joint heirs with Christ.
3, verse 6. Is that what you were pointing at? Okay. Ephesians 3, verse 6 is joint heirs with Gentiles. That there's not this division between Jew and Gentile anymore, but that they are brought together. Yes, they have different histories. Yes, they have different cultures and societies and whatnot. But in Christ, Jew and Gentile is brought together, and God has removed that dividing wall between them and between himself so that they become joint heirs together. And then I heard another idea of joint heirs with Christ. Anyone know where that is? Romans, you say? Yes, Romans chapter 8. If you beat me to it, go ahead and read Romans chapter 8 and verse 17.
And the children.
Back up to 16.
The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him.
All right. That idea of we are fellow heirs or joint heirs with Christ. So, how is the husbands to dwell in a way that is understanding? Well, recognizing that there are some differences, as if they are weaker. Now, that idea of weaker is, someone mentioned physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, whatever. Again, not saying that they are, but as if they are, to treat them with respect, to treat them carefully. I brought up that we have some china, some fine china, and some mugs. You know what we broke more of? The mugs. They shatter easily. I don't know why, but some of them will microwave it and it just falls apart. We haven't had that kind of an issue with our china. Now, is that because we're treating it differently or because it's actually stronger? I don't know. I'm not going to run the tests to try and find out. But we do recognize fine china tends to be weaker. Yet it has held up to, how many moves have we made with those? I mean,
Yeah.
it's some sturdy stuff. And so Peter is not, looking back, I think I might have said it incorrectly, so thank you for pointing it out. But Peter is not implying that women are incapable or weak or insignificant, or instead he's just recognizing there's a difference and that husbands need to treat them correctly, well, specifically showing honor in a way that society didn't, that society would push down. Now, I find it interesting that our society today has kind of reversed it, and almost to the point of saying that men are stupid and worthless and we don't need them, and women are all powerful and stand alone. And yet, as we've gone through these various ways that Peter is calling Christians to interact with one another and with society around them, we see he's not putting anybody down, but instead saying, hey, you are joint heirs with Christ. You are brothers and sisters. You are the children of God, which we saw, I believe that was back in chapter 1. Yeah. back in chapter 1, you are the children of God, and as such, you get to display God to the world around you. What higher calling could there possibly be? So before you think of yourself as lowly and worthless and nobody, like a slave, then fix that attitude. Or before you think of yourself as all big and bad and the best that there was, like these husbands could potentially, fix that attitude. Have the mindset, I already quoted Philippians 2, but have the mindset of Christ. Have that attitude. Jesus is God himself, and yet he doesn't grasp that. He doesn't hang on to that. Instead, he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. And so each of these groups, Peter is calling to display Christ to the world around. Now, we haven't quite finished out verse 7, so we do need to take a look at that. He says, you husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. And then there's a so that, a purpose statement, so that your prayers will not be hindered. What is the concluding reason given for living this way? Oh, sorry, I skipped question 28. What is she a fellow heir of? Notice what it says. Grace of life. What does that mean? What is grace of life?
Living with Christ.
Okay, living with Christ.
God's grace on people who are living.
Okay, God's grace on people. Salvation.
Being saved, yeah.
Being saved, yeah. That's the idea, that you are to treat her as if she's a fellow heir of all the grace that God bestows. All the grace that God bestows. Salvation, a new life, all of that is what each of us are. And so Peter and Paul, I've mentioned a couple of things from Paul, recognizes that there is a difference between men and women. And yet there's a equality as well. That together we are joint heirs of Christ. We are the same in that regard, but we are created differently. And I think, I want to say it was when we did the first part of this, we talked about the idea of complementarianism. And I know that's a big fancy word. It's definitely worth doing some reading and some studying. The idea is, and I think that it's scriptural, that God created men and women different. And that was part of how he displayed his glory. Part of how he created them in his image or as his representatives to show who he is was by having this difference and yet equality. And the fact that they are both able to come to God directly through Christ, they are equal completely. But the fact that God has given different roles and different responsibilities, different expectations, that's okay. For men and women to be different is part of God's plan. And yet, don't think that just because your role is such and such, that means something. Don't think just because your role is in submission, that means that you're less than. We've talked about this idea of submission is aligning under, which provides a support and an enablement. Don't think that just because you are stronger or in that authority position, that means you get to push down. Well, that drives you away from where you ought to be, instead of working together to become and to accomplish what God designed and intended. Specifically, he then says, so that your prayers will not be hindered. That's the concluding reason given for living in this way. What does it mean to be hindered?
To impede.
To impede.
Detain.
Detain,
Prevent.
prevent, cut off,
Cut
or make
into.
tedious. Block. Yeah, exactly. So, how seriously should we take this, husbands, men? Do you want your relationship with God to be strong and capable so that when you talk to him, you realize we have direct access to the God of the universe unless we're not doing this. And he's saying, hey, your prayers will be blocked, cut up. Like, do you realize how serious that is? Like, we have direct access into the throne room of God because of who Jesus Christ is. And then he turns around and says, but if you're not treating your wife right, I'm shutting the door. I'm kicking you out. Now, that's not to say I'm breaking off your relationship with me, but he's saying I'm not listening to you because you're not listening to me. You're not doing what I told you to, so you're not treating me like God, like the authority. So why would I listen to your requests if you're not listening to my instructions? That's the way that this works, that he is God and that we are his servants. So we listen to what he says, and he protects and provides and takes care of us. I was doing some reading and saw an interesting connection with the idea of God's discipline. We often don't like to think that, well, God's going to block our prayers, or he's not going to listen to us, or that we aren't going to have a good, vibrant relationship. Yet Hebrews 12 talks about that when God disciplines us, we actually need to recognize that's a good thing, that he is molding us. He's doing that because he loves us. And so this directive to husbands is to live or dwell with in an understanding way, as if they're weaker, as if they are fellow heirs, those two together, recognizing their position. They're created different, but created equal, and they have a role, and you also do. And if you mistreat them, I'm not going to listen to your prayers. They'll be hindered. But instead, I want you to be everything that you're supposed to be. I want you to do everything that you're supposed to do. All of this, all of these relationships that we've been looking at, what is their goal? What is their role in society? Well, it's not to live just like society. Because in society, slaves are lazy, doing whatever they want to. Women, they're only there to look pretty. Men, you're in charge and you get to demand everything. That's society's mindset, and particularly in his day. Instead, slaves, submit to your masters so that they come to Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands so that they come to Christ. Don't live your life just for the outward appearance, but instead display Christ to the world around, because that's what you've been called to. Husbands, do the same thing. Don't take this position as if it's all about me, but instead lift up your wife, show her value as precious, because she is. She's a joint heir. She is equal with you and with Christ. There's no way you can push down Christ, so don't push her down. And a specific warning is then given. There's not really warnings given to the others. Did you notice that? There's not these negatives, hey, bad things are happening if you're not doing this. Although there is instructions, and when we disobey God, bad things do happen. But those are kind of implied. But here he just flat out says, your prayers will be hindered if you're not doing this. So, each of these is addressed to a different group or a portion of society as to how they're supposed to live in relationship with others in their society. And it flips the script from the norm of that day's society. It flips the script from the norm of our day of society. And I find it interesting that this thing that really lifts up and elevates the wives is looked on in our society as pushing them down. It's like, no, Peter's saying, you have a high calling. This is a good thing. The next section is going to start off with, to sum up, or finally, or it's one of the ways you could translate it is the end, which I find interesting because we're only about halfway through the book of 1 Peter, and Peter's saying finally. But what he's doing is tying it all up together, bringing it to a conclusion, and we're gonna pick that up next week and look at what is it then to sum up? What is the conclusion of this idea? I'm going to pray, and then if you've got any questions or anything, I would love to try and answer them. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for your word. Lord, thank you that we are a new creation in you. Lord, you have called us to something that is way different than the way of the world, that's so much higher and so much better. And yet, so often we look at it as a burden, as a hard thing. The reality is, Lord, we can't do it without your help. But in you, this is truly an amazing calling. So, Father, I pray that you would help us, because we do need you. Lord, thank you that we get to display Christ to the world around us. Pray that you would help each one of us in the roles that you have given us, in the ways that you have designed and desire of us, to show others who you are. You are awesome and amazing. We love you, Lord, and give you the praise. In Jesus' name, amen. Are there any questions?